In the early years after the Great World Conflict, when empires faded like sand carried by desert winds, the Middle East became a stage where destiny shifted in silence, a place where the United States discovered that power was measured not by armies alone, but by whispers traded in corridors and promises sealed beneath lantern light far from public memory. Across the vast deserts, a new struggle was unfolding, its outline barely visible amid the rising heat, for the region held something more valuable than any crown or treaty, a resource that could tilt the balance of nations. And with it came ambitions, fears, and the quiet footsteps of intelligence officers sent to map a world reshaped by twilight alliances. The Central Intelligence presence began not with grand declarations, but with questions posed in dim embassy rooms, carried by men and women trained to read gestures, silences, and the subtle tremors of political unrest. For they knew the land was a tapestry woven with ancient tribes, colonial scars, and aspirations that no foreign mind could fully comprehend. To Washington, the region appeared fragile yet essential, a crossroads where rival empires had once collided, and now a new contest emerged, one fought not with battalions, but with coded cables, brief encounters in smoke-filled cafes, and networks that shifted like dunes beneath a restless wind, promising both opportunity and peril with equal certainty. Some of the earliest missions were little more than cautious observations, attempts to understand leaders rising from post-war chaos, yet each encounter revealed layers of tension born from decades of distrust, foreign borders drawn without consent, and communities whose loyalties flowed through bloodlines older than any modern state could claim authority over. Field officers moved through ancient markets, diplomatic receptions, and remote outposts, collecting fragments of truth that seldom aligned, for every voice carried its own history, every rumor concealed a motive, and every promise held the possibility of betrayal lurking beneath carefully chosen words, a reminder that clarity was a luxury rarely found here. As months turned to years, the United States realized that the region's hidden wars were already alive, carried not by soldiers, but by ideology, ambition, and suspicion, forces that spread across borders with an ease no map could contain, forcing intelligence officers to navigate a landscape where allies could become adversaries before dawn's first call. And so the agency stepped deeper into the shadows, believing its presence would shape stability, unaware that each decision, each whispered agreement, each calculated risk would set in motion consequences that future generations would struggle to untangle, a testament to how quietly history can be redirected by those working beneath the cover of night. By the end of its first decade in the region, the United States intelligence network had become a silent actor in unfolding events, its influence felt but rarely seen, its mistakes buried beneath layers of secrecy, its victories claimed only in private halls, and its role in shaping the fate of nations beginning to stretch far beyond its original intention. Yet even in those early days, a question haunted the minds of those who served, whether the agency was guiding the region toward stability or merely stirring deeper currents that no foreign power could truly master. For the Middle East held a memory older than empires, and those who entered its shadows soon learned that the desert never forgot the footprints left. As the United States deepened its presence across the shifting sands, the quiet ambitions of its intelligence service began to crystallize into operations that reached beyond observation. For Washington feared that rivals would seize the region's political vacuum, turning fragile states into battlegrounds of ideology, and thus subtle intervention became an unspoken duty. The first significant actions unfolded behind layers of diplomatic courtesy, where officers met with ministers, tribal figures, and advisors who navigated power with the ease of those born into ancient hierarchies. Yet beneath each conversation lingered currents of mistrust, as local leaders weighed foreign promises against memories of distant empires long departed. It was during this era that the agency began to craft alliances that would shape decades of regional history, selecting partners not through public agreements, but through discrete channels built upon shared interests, promises of economic aid, and the unspoken assurance that support would endure even in the most turbulent political storms the region could offer. One early intervention centered on a government struggling to maintain authority as competing factions vied for influence, each claiming legitimacy rooted in culture, faith, or inherited power. And while Washington saw the crisis as a potential entry point for adversaries abroad, Local officials viewed it as a chance to strengthen their own fragile positions from within. The agency offered guidance, intelligence, and quiet backing, believing that stability could be engineered like a carefully planned negotiation. Yet the complex landscape exposed limits to such confidence, for each action cast new ripples across rival groups who interpreted aid not as support for peace, but as a foreign attempt to tilt the delicate balance of their land. Counter-movements soon arose, some fueled by ideology, others by resentment toward outside influence, and they spread through cities and villages alike, carried by voices weary of intervention, revealing a truth the agency had underestimated, that the region's narrative was not written by governments alone, but by its people whose loyalties shifted like wind. As unrest grew, the agency attempted to adjust, sending new officers with deeper cultural knowledge, hoping that listening more closely might correct earlier missteps. Yet even these efforts uncovered contradictory signals. Leaders who promised cooperation by day quietly aligned with rivals by night, shaping a maze where trust dissolved with each new revelation. The crisis reached a turning point when a planned political transition collapsed under the weight of competing agendas, leaving Washington stunned, for intelligence reports had predicted unity that never materialized, a miscalculation rooted not in lack of information, but in the belief that all actors shared a common desire for foreign-backed stability. In the aftermath, senior officials debated whether interference had accelerated the nation's fracture or merely exposed tensions that had simmered beneath its surface for generations. Yet no consensus emerged, only the realization that influence in the Middle East demanded a humility rarely practiced in distant capitals, where decisions were shaped by urgency. Still, despite the setback, the agency did not withdraw, for the stakes were too great and the rival powers too eager to exploit any hesitation, and thus the United States resolved to refine its methods, stepping deeper into the region's political labyrinth, certain that the next operation would succeed where this one had faltered under the desert's quiet weight. And so the hidden wars continued, not with open conflict, but with calculations whispered through encrypted channels and meetings cloaked in dusk, as the agency learned that in this land of ancient memory, even the smallest intervention could echo across decades, weaving consequences no strategist could fully foresee, yet impossible for Washington to ignore. By the time a new decade dawned over the shifting dunes, the agency's presence in the region had grown into a complex web of alliances, favors, and silent arrangements, each designed to strengthen influence while concealing the true extent of involvement. Yet every connection carried its own risks, for loyalty in the Middle East was a currency that often changed hands. Within embassies and safe houses, officers gathered nightly to review whispers gathered from journalists, merchants, scholars, and tribal intermediaries whose words formed paths through the region's hidden tensions. But the deeper the agency listened, the clearer it became that truth existed not as a single thread, but as a tapestry woven from competing memories. Some alliances proved unexpectedly fragile, built on agreements spoken in candlelit rooms where promises were made to secure temporary leverage, yet unraveling whenever politics or pressure shifted, revealing how influence could evaporate overnight, leaving operatives to navigate sudden hostility from those who once acted as trusted conduits for information. One particularly complicated relationship involved a prominent family whose influence spread across several provinces, a family tied to oil interests, religious leaders, and military officers, making them an ideal partner on paper. Yet beneath their public unity lay private rivalries that the agency failed to recognize until those tensions erupted without warning. As internal disputes fractured the family's power structure, intelligence streams twisted into contradictions, with different factions offering different truths, each seeking favor from Washington, leaving analysts to sort through a labyrinth of claims where every detail could be a genuine warning or a carefully crafted trap set for political advantage. The confusion allowed rival powers to step quietly into the vacuum, exploiting fractures the agency had not anticipated, forging their own alliances with factions overlooked or dismissed, a reminder that influence was never absolute, and that even a single misread relationship could alter the regional balance before any corrective action could be taken. Meanwhile, double agents emerged with increasing frequency, individuals who played both sides with practiced ease, feeding Washington stories laced with accuracy and deception in equal measure. Stories that guided policy decisions while slowly leading operations toward dead ends, revealing how deeply manipulation could infiltrate even the most guarded networks. One case involved a well-connected informant long considered reliable, a man whose reports had shaped countless assessments, yet whose sudden disappearance exposed a startling truth. He had been quietly serving another foreign service, using the agency's trust to steer its attention away from operations unfolding beneath the surface of regional conflict. The revelation sent shockwaves through the network, prompting a reevaluation of every lead he had ever supplied, and as analysts retraced the threads of his influence, they discovered that several decisions believed to be strategic triumphs were merely illusions created when false confidence overshadowed the careful skepticism intelligence work demanded. These events ignited a somber debate within headquarters about the nature of partnership in a region where shifting allegiance was a survival art, not a betrayal, and where promises were shaped by context rather than doctrine, forcing officers to confront the uncomfortable truth that understanding culture required more than briefings and diplomatic observations. Still, despite setbacks, the agency persisted, for each collapse revealed new pathways, and every betrayal unveiled motivations that could be turned into leverage. And thus the hidden wars continued, pushed forward by officers who believed that influence, even fragile, was better than silence, better than leaving the region's future solely to the ambitions of rivals. And beneath the desert night, as alliances shifted and loyalties dissolved, one realization echoed through the minds of those watching events unfold, that in the Middle East, power was never seized outright. It was borrowed, moment by moment, from people whose stories stretched far beyond foreign understanding, shaping history in ways the agency could influence, but never fully command, no matter how deeply it moved in the shadows. As the region entered a new and turbulent era, the hidden wars grew sharper, shaped not by armies moving across borders, but by invisible decisions made in rooms where curtains stayed closed. For this was the age when intelligence itself became a battlefield, and shadows began to clash with a ferocity that echoed across deserts older than any modern nation. Across the Middle East, conflicts erupted with sudden violence, each one fueled by layers of grievance, ideology, and ambition that foreign observers struggled to decipher. Yet the agency remained convinced that through subtle influence, pressure, and quiet alliances, it could steer events toward stability, even as storm clouds gathered beyond its sight. Drone technology, satellite surveillance, and encrypted communications marked a new phase of covert action, tools that promised unprecedented advantage. Yet seasoned officers understood that machines could not read the human heart, nor could they unravel loyalties shaped by centuries of faith, history, and memory, forces that defied cold calculation and prediction. In one desert nation fractured by civil strife, the agency attempted to guide a fragile coalition believed capable of restoring order, but rival factions maneuvered with speed and subtlety, shifting allegiances through midnight meetings and whispered negotiations that moved faster than any report that reached Washington's distant halls. Meanwhile, an adversarial power seized the moment to advance its influence, supplying covert support to militias and political groups who promised alliance, yet served only themselves, creating a landscape where every action triggered reactions in unpredictable directions, a labyrinth of intent where even success risked igniting consequences beyond control. Inside field stations, officers debated strategy with rising urgency, studying maps covered in markers that shifted weekly, trying to anticipate the next eruption. But each attempt revealed how shallow their understanding remained, for the region's pulse beat according to its own rhythm, one shaped by local memory, not by foreign ambition or geopolitical design. A turning point came when a covert operation meant to stabilize a key city unraveled in a single night, undone not by enemy strength, but by a chain of misunderstandings among local leaders whose private rivalries ran deeper than their public alliances. A reminder that foreign intervention could illuminate tensions, but could never fully contain them. The fallout spread quickly, fueling unrest that rippled through border towns and tribal lands, drawing in groups long ignored by intelligence assessments. And as chaos grew, the agency found itself confronting the painful truth that influence, once lost, could not be reclaimed with force or technology, only with trust that took generations to rebuild. In Washington, The operation sparked fierce debate, with some insisting that stronger intervention would have prevented collapse, while others argued that the region's complexities demanded restraint, not escalation, echoing a question that haunted policy circles since the earliest covert missions, the question of how far one nation should reach. Yet despite the turmoil, intelligence officers continued their work, driven by a belief that even in failure, understanding could be gained, and that each setback revealed fragments of the truth needed to navigate a world where alliances were temporary and intentions often obscured behind veils of ceremony, tradition, and survival. As tensions mounted, the hidden wars no longer felt like distant maneuvers, but like a slow, inevitable tide pulling the agency deeper into a region whose history resisted foreign hands, and whose people carried stories etched through generations, stories that shaped decisions in ways no external force could ever fully anticipate or command. By the time the dust settled on this chapter of the struggle, officers understood that their role had shifted from shaping events to simply enduring them, watching as the Middle East revealed, again, that power exercised from afar was fragile, temporal, and often swallowed whole by currents older than the nations that sought to influence them. As a new dawn rose over the fractured region, the agency's long struggle reached a threshold that felt less like an ending and more like a reckoning, for the hidden wars had revealed not only the limits of influence, but the shadows cast by every decision made far from the dust, blood, and memory of the Middle East itself. Across field stations, officers observed the shifting landscape with a quiet recognition that the battles waged in secrecy had changed them, shaping their beliefs about power, loyalty, and consequence. Truths learned not through briefings, but through nights spent navigating deserts where history never slept. One final operation dominated their thoughts, a mission designed not to control events, but to prevent a collapse that might ignite fires across the region, fires that could spread faster than any rival nation's ambitions and consume decades of delicate alliances built through fragile trust and countless whispered promises. The mission unfolded beneath a moon that hovered like a silent witness, casting silver light over borderlands where militias, merchants, and exiled leaders crossed paths as part of an endless dance, each bound by motives hidden beneath tradition, fear, or hope, making prediction as impossible as stilling the wind. Within a discreet mountain outpost, analysts tracked movements across valleys riddled with old trade routes and newer smuggling corridors, searching for signs that a coalition of extremist factions might unite, a union that would threaten not only the region's balance, but the stability of distant continents as well. Yet the deeper they looked, the more they realized their vision remained partial, fragmented, shaped by sources whose loyalties flickered like desert lanterns in a storm. And so the agency shifted strategy, choosing to listen not only to informants, but to the unspoken rhythms of the communities themselves. This change revealed a truth long obscured, that the region's future could not be forced through covert design, only guided through understanding, and that even then, success depended on forces beyond foreign command, forces shaped by faith, ancestry, and identity older than any modern intelligence apparatus. In the end, the feared coalition fractured before it fully formed, undone not by intervention but by internal rivalries ignited over ancestral disputes that outsiders had failed to grasp, reminding every officer that comprehension of the Middle East required humility more than strategy, patience more than pressure. Yet the agency did not celebrate, for victory felt unearned, a moment shaped less by foresight than by the unpredictable shape of history. And as news traveled back to Washington, a somber mood settled over those who understood how fragile stability remained, how quickly the sands could shift once more. Quiet reflections filled the halls of headquarters as officers considered the years spent navigating these hidden wars, years marked by secret triumphs, painful mistakes, and lessons carved into their memories by encounters with cultures whose depth defied simplified narratives or foreign expectations. And as they looked toward the future, one realization echoed through every office, briefing room, and remote outpost, that intelligence work in the Middle East was not a path toward mastery, but a journey through shadows that offered glimpses of truth only to those willing to walk slowly, carefully, and without illusion that they could fully shape what had been forged across millennia. In the final hours of this chapter, as the region settled into a fragile calm, A message arrived from a veteran officer stationed in a distant valley, a message that contained no classified detail, only a single reflection, one that resonated far beyond the secrecy of his post. We do not control the desert. We survive it. Those words lingered long after the lights dimmed in Washington, a reminder that power, in the end, was a temporary guest in lands where history spoke in whispers older than empires. And as the video fades, the desert wind rises, carrying with it a truth no agency can ever fully escape. Some wars remain hidden not because they are secret, but because they are eternal.